All right, everyone. We are on episode 28 of the Conquer the Mind podcast. I appreciate all the new viewers. Thank you for everyone for subscribing to the channel. If you find any value, make sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, help out the algorithm. We got a really great guest today with Brian of SMB Franchise Advisors. Has a really interesting story that I think a lot of us relate to. Starting off, looking for the finance direction. Brian worked on Wall Street, investment banking, IPOs, all these words that most people probably don't even know about. So I'm not going to bore everyone with those words. But Brian has a lot of credibility on Wall Street, analyzing, looking at businesses. And now he's transitioned to the world of franchising, where we call Main Street. So a little Wall Street to Main Street, but both helping business owners really take their growth to that next level. So Brian, thank you so much for joining me on episode 28.
No, thanks, Josh. Great to be here and congrats. 28 great episodes. I've been listening for a long time.
Awesome. I'm excited. So typically with the podcast, the goal really being to try to empower other people to that next stage of their career. And I think your background's really fascinating, going into Wall Street, going the finance direction. And like Wall Street's like the most cutthroat industry, very tough, but a lot of people were in college, especially for guys, I feel like everyone's a business major or an engineering major or a nursing major, somewhere along those lines. But a lot of guys and girls are business majors.
Yeah.
They're thinking about Wall Street. But can you walk us through what was the mindset as you're in college, you're graduating? Was Wall Street finance kind of always the path, or what was kind of the mindset as you're starting to graduate college, starting to figure out what do I want to do in this world?
No, it wasn't. And that's one of the rare ones, I think, in the space. So for me, I went to Marist College, which was, great school in New York. I really enjoyed it a lot. And I majored in marketing, but also double majored in economics. And so I did pick up this kind of understanding of markets and trends, but economics is really psychology, right? It's why are people doing things when they're making money decisions, right? And so macro is for the world and micro is for the person, right, in the household. And so did a lot of learning there and enjoyed it. But all my internships and things I did were really focused on either marketing or small and medium-sized businesses. At SMB, when we do stuff like that, my uncle is our founder, Steve Beagleman. So when I was 9 years old, I was at franchise trade shows, handing out pamphlets, being around these people who, had built these businesses to a couple of units and then a bunch of units. And to me, that was big business. And it wasn't, but I felt like it was. And then I went to college and kind of ended up in a world where my internships were at Johnson & Johnson in a sort of finance rotation. So even though I was in marketing, we had the budget for the marketing team. It was a finance role. And so I learned a little bit there. And then I had the opportunity after college where I actually joined Goldman Sachs and was working in operations and technology and all these sort of things that helped run the bank before moving on to the desk that I was covering and working on a whole bunch of different products in the finance world. So spending, 5 or 6 years in that environment of cutting your teeth, learning all the different stuff, I still took something that another mentor of mine who still works at the bank said, and he said, bankers chase the people who do things. I had this itch to go and do something. I didn't want to keep covering a certain segment of clients or a couple of different clients. And as my career was growing, I said, okay, let me go try and learn that by operating in a different business. And so I joined a venture-backed startup that everybody thought would IPO and have this big liquidity event, right? Big sort of capital opportunity in their market that they were in. It was in the real estate space in New York in 2019. And then that pretty quickly fizzled out for that particular company. They all thought it was one thing and it wasn't. And so I got my quick and dirty lesson on growing venture-backed businesses, debt-backed businesses, how that actually works for the founders, the controllers, the teams that are there, because the board responsibilities and the expectations are completely different, right? Than when it really is one person or a few key people who understand the business, run the business, and are in it every day doing that work. And so after that period, I went back into banking, but I was banking a lot of venture-backed startups. I went into, a startup realm, a platform role to really build and grow small businesses again. This time they were technology startups in and around New York City, across the US. and came into SMB full time when I said, wait a minute. There's all these businesses that are growing over here in the franchise segment. There's a lot of people looking at the capital needs, whether that's to grow as a franchisee, right? How do I start one of my units that I want to go be a part of when I've made a brand decision? And of course, for the franchisor, how do I grow? What is the alternatives to taking out venture capital or taking on venture debt loans or some other way of growing the core business? Franchising is a great answer to that question if you're willing to let go and have partners and do things in a little bit of a different way, right? So we now advise our founders on that every day, and it's been a lot of fun kind of blending those two passions together.
That's awesome, Brian. I appreciate you really sharing and diving into your story. I think that's very helpful for a lot of people. And one thing I really want to dive into as I was kind of doing my due diligence on your career, you've done a lot of internships leading up to even getting into Wall Street. I just had the founder of Skill Samurai on, and we were kind of talking about how, for me personally, school probably just killed my confidence. It didn't help me as much. It was more doing things outside the school system, kind of doing those internships, getting that real world experience. Can you talk to us, how important were those internships? Did it directly relate to any real world experience, or what are you kind of learning through your internships compared to what you're learning in the school system?
Yeah, it's so interesting because internships are the most important thing that you'll probably do when you're at a college age. I still sit on the board for the Marist College School of Management. They call it the Young Alumni Association. I don't know how long we're young. They'll kick me off soon, I'm sure. But, it's a lot of fun to work with those kids and say, hey, not only should this is the thing I want to go do, like you said, Josh, investment banking, everybody, white shirts and hair pulled back, and they want to go get their internships. And I said, guys, how about you get an internship anywhere doing anything, because you need something. And the most valuable thing you can learn in an internship is actually what you don't like. Very similar to if you're in a franchise environment, right? You're looking at a couple brands, you're thinking about something as a franchisee or as an investor or something else. Meet the team, do discovery day, right? You need to understand, we're dating now. Do we want to get married? Is this where I want my job to be? Internship is a 10-week interview. It's a date. It's a process. Do you like each other? Do you not? Is it a fit? And if the answer is no, that's more valuable to know than when you go, of course, this is what I want to do. I knew that from day, zero. And some people do that, and that's great too. But that's not the norm. When you get to try a lot of different things, it's incredibly valuable.
No, I think that's a really, really great lesson. I feel like a lot of people, when you're trying to figure out that why, it often comes down to figuring out a lot of things that you don't like, and then maybe figuring out how you can change some of those things or implement those. So I think that's really fascinating. Over your course, you're doing internships at a pretty early age. Was this something that you personally wanted to do? Did you have a good upbringing of people that wanted to push you in that direction, or how are you so motivated at an early age to want to learn all these different things?
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually grew up in an environment where, short of my uncle who was doing franchise work, no one around me really had a business background. I had grandparents that were police and fire and engineers. I had a single mom who was working in a local police department as an administrator. I had a father who was a vice principal in a school system. Nobody said, here's business and what you should go do. But I think you take a lot of those lessons forward, right? So if I think about the way that, you've got a coach or you've got a community leader, a pillar like, the police or fire, kind of folks, the way that those people in my life would interact with the community around them. Well, you have the heart of a teacher, you care about a place, you're trying to bring people along, make it better, do more. The schools, forget it, with the sports and everybody coaching everything. My mother was a coach, my father was a coach. So everybody had this sort of mentorship mindset. I'm not a teacher, but I still apply that mindset every single day, right? And so some of those lessons, I think, really carried forward in a valuable way. But the other piece is that, I had people say to me, you should go do business because that seems to be what everybody's doing and seems to be a really good thing. I know nothing about it, but that seems to be a really good thing. And so I was very lucky that even if I was, a little bit lazy, particularly in school, I always loved talking to people. I love learning from people. I always was hanging out with the older people at a party, not the younger kids all hanging, my own age. And that has paid off. You get teased at the time, but it has paid off to learn and have a network of folks who help you to do all kinds of different things in your life.
Yeah, you see me laughing because all my like older relatives, they call me an old soul in the family.
Yeah.
And I'm the exact same way, Brian. Like I actually like kind of struggle talking to people my age because the first question they ask is like, what do you do for fun? Like this and that. It's like, I actually love working. Like I love my job. I think it's a lot of fun doing podcasts with someone like yourself. So it's like, it's hard to build that actual connection. Whereas talking to the older generation, and I think that's something the younger generation doesn't do enough, but like the older generation, they've already been through all the things we've been through. And obviously the world's changing with AI, ChatGPT, this and that, but they have the knowledge for us to learn from. And then, like you said, you don't have to take everything, but you can learn a lot of stuff you don't like as well along the process. And then you can start to implement that into your own life. Like for me personally, I was always kind of pushed like the Wall Street, the finance direction, but I wasn't really putting myself in that world. So it wasn't until like I was 21 that I actually tried the finance world. And then you realize you don't like that world. And that's when you're supposed to feel like, you have your life figured out, you have your career figured out. So I think those are some really good lessons to start to try different things, start to figure things out along the way. I'd be curious because no one in your family was the finance route. What was the kick to Wall Street? Is it kind of just like Wall Street's, that's where the money is? Or, it's so cutthroat, it's so much work. The internships, investment banking is like the hardest of the hard. Like I remember all the people I went to college with that were studying to be investment bankers. From freshman year, they were already knew the direction they wanted to go, doing internships, studying it, living, breathing. And a lot of them often had parents that were either like lawyers, investment bankers, somewhere kind of top of that industry. What was like the push for you to go the Wall Street direction? Why did you find that so fascinating?
Yeah, so it's funny because I tell people that I fell into it, kind of by accident, and they don't believe me because that's so abnormal. But, it's true in the sense that I was able to take, the opportunities available to me and go to do that, but only at a certain point, right? Like it was in operations and technology and run the bank back office roles where you're learning and you're in that environment. I would have had no business going right into any of the stuff I did around, banking or covering those clients or, working eventually in the venture capital space and still for a big bank, with some direct investment exposure. Like we would have had no business doing that. I would have had no business doing that. But you learn as you go, right? And so what I think was really interesting is that even though it was go do business, and that was definitely a focus. I was always the person who said I live 12 miles from Manhattan, but I always said, well, I don't need to go there for work. There's plenty of stuff here. You would walk around and something I'd encourage anybody to do, right? If you're looking for that internship, that business exposure, walk to places in your town and, ask to go be involved. Hey, do you guys need a marketing person for the summer? I mean, today, to your point, Josh, turn AI into a positive for you, not this negative, horrible, scary thing. Can I use Canva to make a local restaurant that I like look really, really good for $100 a week and call it my internship? It's taking a couple hours of my life. I live in the town. You probably could do that. And that's something where I think finding opportunity organically and growth organically is always the best situation. Now, there's the people who will say, yes, fly to New York, get 10 interviews and, sit and do all of those. In banking, they call them super days, right? So if you can get the interview, it's 4 hours, you meet a whole bunch of people. They might pick you to come on their team after that meeting. And, especially at the analyst level, it's still really driven from a sort of bottom-up approach on the interview side. But I think that all the work experience and the exposure is just invaluable because it gets you to that point. Believe me, school and I were not exactly tight. So being able to do that in a live setting and have stories to talk about and references who were in business, successful, age appropriate, not with me, but with my managers, right, that I would have in my first jobs, was really, really helpful.
I love that advice. I think that's really powerful. And especially with the podcast, one of the genres of people tuned in is, people high school, college, trying to figure out that why. And, my sister right now, about to graduate from UCLA, she's going through all this, the job applications, trying to figure out what you're passionate about, what you like to do, what you want to do. And I always kind of say like similar advice with like, you could go through the job applications, the resumes. I can tell you I've never had any good experience with that. I don't even hear back from any of them, which is really unfortunate. So it's hard to get that feedback to improve. So I'm a huge supporter of what you just said. Like, find different alternative ways to show that you actually care, because you can't even think about how many hundreds of thousands, especially in Wall Street, applications they're getting on like a daily basis. Whereas, go to someone local in your community, show that you care, show that you want to learn. The older generation is very open to sharing their insights, their experiences, their knowledge, but the younger generation is just not that curious or interested. We just want to scroll on social media and have a good time. So I think it's just really powerful to kind of pick the older brains generation apart and learn how you can do things differently. And one great piece of advice that I tell people when you're looking for a job, use LinkedIn, message people at different companies, not because you want a job, but just get 20, 30, 15 minutes of their time to ask questions about what they do in their business and if they're happy, because that's going to give you some strong validation. And even though you're not asking for a job, now you have that foot in the door, which is how you actually get that resume seen. So I think those are all really great points. And Brian, one of the things we're kind of talking about right now is like learning the skills that eventually help you later on, and also learning the skills that don't help you later on. So one of the things I find pretty interesting, as you kind of talk about your family, you had, an uncle in franchising, but pretty much like law enforcement, police officers. You kind of mentioned very good mentorship positions, coachability. And it sounds like that was something you kind of learned. You took your own route in terms of business ownership, but you kind of took some of those skills with mentorship, coachability. And from my understanding, even like you growing up, you were supervising like 40 plus students at different school facilities. So I'm just curious, was this kind of like watching your parents in like their leadership positions, or how at an early age are you starting to like implement yourself into these mentorship, these leadership abilities? Because, in Wall Street and your time in SMB, that's what you're doing. You're mentoring, you're leading all these businesses, but it started off at an early age with you learning all these different skills to be where you are now. So, with the podcast, trying to help people with those points where they're not where you are today, but how are you starting to learn these coachability index, mentorship? How important are these skills, and how are you developing these at an early age?
Yeah, no, look, I think a lot of it's incredibly important, but also it needs to come naturally. So what would happen is I was never the best person in the marching band when I was in band, never the best person in school, never the best person, in any athletic sport that we were doing. But I was always willing to be there and to be involved and to be engaged. And eventually, came to a point where people would say, Brian, we want you to be the drum major of the marching band. We want you to lead everybody, because even though you're not the best at any one thing, you really seem to understand the people that are in this, that are, have opinions about it, that are in the stage of life that you're in, right? That was in high school. You're all balancing school, you're all balancing different things, and you're adding activities. Like, you can understand these people and yet also still talk to all the old guys who are, the teachers that are running things, the coaches and the chaperones, the parents, all these different people. So those are great opportunities. Part of it, I'd say 51% came naturally, 49% came from having people that were in my life to say, from a position of just respect, right? It was not that, my grandfather had a badge and was a cop and that's why people respected him. It's because it was community policing. And back in the day, everybody just knew him because he walked the block, and he lived there and he was engaged and he was involved. And so certainly didn't make $1 million doing it, but really made an impact on the people's lives around him. And I do think that that's one of the things that's really important. It's something that I took with me. And even when I was in banking and spending a lot of hours, away, I helped a friend who was a band director in another town that had no program, no funding, no nothing, to start a program. And so technically it was the, assistant band director, but in reality, it was me and her and, 10 kids one year, then 12 kids the next year, then 15 kids the next year, then 40 kids. And all of a sudden, hey, if the football team has a good year, that helps us out too. Everybody cares a little more. And you build a fully functioning program pretty organically for the kids who would have had nothing otherwise, right? And so when you allude to, travel and engagement. And by the way, some of my best friends now have come from that. It's the parents of the kids who, I was able to help through that time in their life. And now they're getting married because we're all getting old. And so it's great to see them kind of becoming an adult and having a long-term relationship because of the way that you invested in them, early. And people had done that for me, right? So I think the way that you can reinvest in your community is always going to be the answer. But then the problem statement is always, and Josh, something you and I have talked about is like problems or passions. There's only two things, and that determines what you want to do in your life, what motivates you when you wake up in the morning, how you treat other people. If you can pick off that menu and say, I'm either solving a problem or I'm really passionate about this. Yeah. Maybe it's a great business idea. Maybe it's not, but it's something in your values that's really, really important to always come back to, because that will reward you when the time is right and other folks see it and are engaged.
No, that I really like those points, and I'll push back a little bit on like the problems versus passion. So like when I deal with candidates, I feel like a lot of people that come in, they have a problem at work, their boss yells at them, they have a due date that they don't want to deal with, they have a problem. Now they inquire about franchising, business ownership. And I feel like a lot of those people tend to be more like the window shoppers. They just want to see as many things as possible to say, this is going to make me more money than I am currently. And, overall, any situation, there's pros, there's cons. Business ownership, as amazing as it is, and as much as I love business ownership, it's not for everyone by any means. It takes a ton of work. So for some people, the safety, the stability of corporate America may better suit your needs, your lifestyle. So it really does come down to, the passion. What are you passionate about? The people in your life, how can you help them take their goals to that next level, I think is really powerful. And one of the things before we kind of dive into SMB, you're in Wall Street, you transitioned to SMB Advisors. For a lot of people interested in maybe franchising, business ownership, I think this could be interesting because a lot of people come from finance, they're making a good salary, they have families to support. So it's not easy to make that risk into business ownership when you have the stable salary, the 401k, there's a ton of benefits in Wall Street. How, for you personally, were you able to tell yourself that you wanted to make that transition from Wall Street to the world of franchising and business ownership? What was that decision-making process like?
Yeah. It's funny because the Wall Street Journal actually did an article talking about the amount of pay spread that you would need to make going from a W-2 15th and the 30th paycheck regular employee into business ownership. And everyone thinks, oh, well, it must be pretty close because then you get better tax treatment and other things. It's not close at all. When you polled about 5,000 folks, it was almost a 60% increase in expected just revenue, right? Money that they would need to make by running their own business versus being employed, because you start to tell people there's a risk here, dude. Like you are on the hook for that. You are on the hook. We've all had times running businesses where we are worried about not making payroll, where we figure it out no matter what. Where during COVID, you get in your car, you're closed, but you do DoorDash. Like we figure it out as a way to grow. That is a business owner mentality. That is not a typical employee mentality. So I completely agree with what you're saying and think that it's a really interesting point that's been proven by some data. It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But it's interesting because, you've got these two things, problems and passions. And when you think about personal problems, you're right. Don't solve your problem by going over here into passion land, right? That's hedonism. That's just selfish. There's nothing there. You're wasting time kicking tires, looking at franchise brands because you're not going to do it and it's not motivating enough, right? But if you're the founder of something and you're thinking, hey, I've been doing this job for 20 years. A lot of the tech founders that I used to work with, I have a problem with how we do this process, how we do know your client checks, KYC, know your business checks for business banking, KYB. I have a problem with how we're doing that. So I want to go create a tool that I'll sell to other banks as a technology company and get those sales from other banks who want to outsource this to me, and I'll take care of it because I know there's a better way to do it. That's a problem that someone is really operationalizing, productizing, has a way of developing into a real business. By the same token, does your grandma make the best cookies ever? And as you start giving them away, people say, really, I need to pay you because now you're doing every holiday and at Christmas, you're making 20 grand on the side selling grandma's cookies. You go, maybe there's a business here, right? That's a passion that you should pursue or you should think about pursuing. And as you want to grow, maybe franchising is the route for you, right? So there's all kinds of ways that as you move up those stairs or down those stairs in different phases of your life, the right things come about at the right time to be in business, to grow a business, or to really work in a system with partners, whether it's again as a solopreneur or as a W-2 with a really great team around you.
That's awesome, Brian. And I really like the clarification on the problems versus passion, because I think I interpret it as the problems part is like your own personal problems. It's just like, the stuff isn't going my way. Like, you got to change it up.
Yep.
But I think what you're alluding to is those big picture problems where it's not a personal problem, but you're seeing problems for other people. Yeah. So then you can find ways to create solutions to those problems for other people. So I think that's a really good clarification. I think that's really powerful as well. And, as you're starting to create those, or you figure out what those problems are, or you have that passion, you don't just go all in investing, $100,000 right away. You alluded to with your grandmother's cookies, you're testing them out in the market. You're seeing, is there a need or want for this service? And then with the holidays, how often are they going to keep coming back to that need or service? So I think those are some really great points that I just wanted to highlight that you brought up. So I'd be curious, from Wall Street, you started the transition to SMB Franchise Advisors, or was there like any overlap between the world of Wall Street and the world of franchising, or was it really kind of like day and night, like totally new world?
Yeah, it's funny because I think everybody thinks that everything is so different and everything is so special and everything's so unique. Yeah. And I'm here to say, and what at SMB we say, right, is it doesn't have to be so hard, right? Let's bring the boat closer to the dock before you jump off of whatever you want to do, whatever you want to, talk about or dream state kind of work through. But what's interesting for me is, yes, there's certain differences, and especially in the product and sort of the way that approach to your market is different. But to your point, Josh, you still need validation. You still need testing, proof of concept. You still need some level of funding, whether you can bootstrap it and we build a duration to do that, or you do want to go get, dollars invested. You look at the SBA, you look at different sources. A lot of venture money is moving into franchising, and talk about private equity being at the higher end, maybe of franchising and platform brands and larger sort of infrastructure. Down the curve, there's, companies that are taking those kinds of investments or that have those kinds of networks around them for when they do need the investment, right? So none of this is to say there's a big wall in between and franchising and finance should have nothing in common. But I think that what makes franchising really special is when you're building a tech company, you want to be big. You want to be so big that you're too big to fail. You want to grow to a certain point where there's influence and there's scope and other things. In franchising, even while you grow, your uniqueness, your specialness in whatever you do is a hyper local focused approach. And I don't care if that's because it's the best cookies the grandma ever made that are now all across the country, but the person who's running that store today cares because they treat it like it's their grandma and they're in New Jersey, not in California, not in whatever. You can still have that flavor to it. The tax preparer, right, from a franchise perspective, they need to care about you and your taxes and the things you need done. Those are the people who, again, you might grow to a national scale, but this hyper local focus is the only real difference I see when it's like, how do we get to be so big so quick, or how do we get to be just right in the right markets and then be rewarded, right, with that growth from a brand perspective through franchising?
No, I really like it. I'm kind of thinking of like the old like fairy tale of like the three bears with like the pores. Like one's too hot, one's too cold, one's just right. It's kind of like private equity, franchising, corporate locations. Just stick with the one location. You got to kind of try out these different flavors, if you will, to figure out what best aligns with your proper growth strategy. So figuring out what those mentors are in those different industries to help you evaluate that business, because you don't know what you don't know. And I'll say it so many times on this podcast, there's so many differences between a successful business and a successful franchise model. Like, in my opinion, really nothing's similar about them. So there's just so many differences. And, if you're not in the world of franchising or bring people from that industry, you really just don't know what you don't know. It's like a totally new world, building that infrastructure, the support, the resources. Because if you just go into the world of franchising, start awarding franchises rather than taking the time to build the infrastructure, the systems, the support, that's why there's so many great franchises, but there's just as many bad franchises because of exactly what we're discussing. People rush the process to franchise. Did I pause a little bit on your end? All right, everyone, we are back. Episode 28 is now unpaused, resumed. This was the second time of the Conquer the Mind podcast where we had some technical difficulties. My heart pounded a little bit, but it looks like we still have the original recording. Thank God, because Brian, you've already shared a lot of great knowledge for everyone, so I'm glad we still have that footage. But I think kind of where the footage kind of died off, I was kind of going off where I say a lot, difference between a successful franchise and a successful business is just two completely different worlds. And I want to start to transition into SMB and really all the cool things you guys are doing there. But one kind of like final question as someone that you're in Wall Street, you're evaluating a lot of different businesses, and now with SMB, you've evaluated a lot of different franchises. Could you kind of walk someone from an outside model, knows nothing about kind of franchising? What are like the differences that you're seeing from your perspective between the independent business model and the franchise business model?
No, good to be back from commercial break. I would say there's sort of two things that don't change no matter what segment you're looking at, no matter what part of the market you're in for a business. If you're growing, if you're doing any other kind of number of activities around business, right? The first is from an investor perspective or from the perspective of a partner, right? Whether that's a capital partner or a franchisee as a partner, right? Are you a mandate-driven prospect or are you an opportunistic prospect, right? So if you've got a company that's looking at raising money or going public or doing some other, financial activity, do you want investors who say, here's our mandate? We only do these 5 kinds of investments. We look for these 3 kinds of companies. And if you fit that, we'll start to do some diligence, right? The other is opportunistic. We have this amount of money. We have these number of experts or these people we can put on to, working with you in finance. That style might look a little bit more like a venture firm, right? They play a little earlier. It might be a family office where it's just, truly the wealth of a family or a couple of families that they're trying to put to work and invest. But that might be very different, right? Their opportunity is that they're looking for something, but they can be flexible, right? And they can match you where you are if you're somebody that they generally know, get along with, have some synergy with in the business. So there's nothing to say that you have to do one of those two things, but you'll see people who fit into one of those categories from a perspective, right? Am I mandate driven? Do I have a thing I go and do every single time? Or do I have an opportunistic view? If you have a, opportunistic view and you've decided now through that lens, I want to go and do franchising. What I tell people is that franchising is going to be a lot cheaper, even though it's an investment, don't get me wrong. It's going to be cheaper than going to raise money, going to, starting to franchise your business, going the extra mile to build another corporate unit, hire some infrastructure right away today for, operating that unit, building that out, fitting that out. Those are the kinds of decisions that, again, whether it's an investor perspective or a franchisee's perspective, you want to make sure you have the right partner for. And those things don't change.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And if you heard the word like cheaper in there and you're a business thinking about franchising, don't get too excited. It's definitely not too cheap. It's going to come with expenses to build the infrastructure, the support, the resources. So don't get too excited. But if you are interested in turning that business to a franchise model, that is really just like the initial investment to become a franchise model where, the income opportunities are endless as you start to play the game of royalties and empowering other people to live their dreams of business ownership, scale a business, using your likeness, your brand, your images. So I think it's just such a powerful system where you have the CEO, the founder that, they've invested years figuring out the proper business system, investing into the marketing, creating so many mistakes, finding that ideal customer. and now they can figure out how to provide that opportunity for other people, I think is just so powerful. So Brian, as we kind of dive into SMB advisors now, can you kind of walk us through your transition from the world of Wall Street to SMB advisors? And, I can see your role as chief growth officer, but can you kind of talk to us, what does kind of like that day in the life of Brian look like at SMB?
Yeah. So we've got a couple different things that we do, right, at SMB. There's three tracks. So if we're trying to think about, is it mandate or is it opportunity? I would say it's probably closer to mandate, right? We've got three tracks that we know from a franchise perspective. Our team of more than 15 people now can help you to achieve and to work on with you, and experts in the field that you're looking for. So not even just franchising, but within franchising, right? Who's doing marketing, who's doing finance, who's doing technology and some evaluation, operations, helping write manuals, right? And also deliver all that sort of training and compliance and the things that you need. So if out of those three things, right, you're thinking about growing your business, then for me, it's a couple different ways, right? One is taking in all the new clients that we're potentially seeing, all the candidates we're seeing who want to grow their business. We say no, or you're not ready, to a lot more folks than we say, yes, you should definitely do this too. And so as we start to get to know each other and work through the diligence process, I want to know, what are you looking for out of your business? There's no rule that you have to franchise, but if you choose to go this route, what are you looking for? Are you ready to give up some levers of control? Do you want local people to run and operate and support these businesses as your partners, right? Your franchisees. If you're not ready for that mentally, right? Maybe go raise some money and do some more corporate growth, and you might come back to franchising, right? Who knows? But you gotta know that fit. And then the other thing that we've done is, on the back of the business at the end of 2023, we do have an equity division where, from a long-term engagement perspective, if you have a goal in mind and a target that you want to drive towards, we certainly have a mandate there. And we will, be actively involved as advisors for the long term to your brand. It's not for everybody. It's not something that anyone has to do either. But it's something that just adds to the opportunity where, what we say at SMB is, it's all about the relationship. The things that are going to make you successful in franchising are going to come from the people who've been successful and want to teach you and want to guide you and want to coach you about franchising. So we have lots of different ways that we can hit those points.
No, that's awesome, Brian. And I really like the motto of it's all about the relationship. I think that's so powerful. I have a lot of friends, and they're in corporate America, and they're kind of looking for like that annual income. They're asking their boss on like that annual basis, I want some more money. I want to build my salary. But, it really is, if you want to make more money, build more relationships, find more problems to solve. That was, we were kind of alluding to earlier with the passion or problems. I think that's just such a powerful point. But diving into it, it's all about the relationship. You kind of mentioned your uncle was kind of in franchising, and maybe that sparked some interest. Could you kind of talk to us about your uncle in franchising? Did that play any role in terms of guiding you into the world of franchising? I know kind of the joke is, is you either fall into it or you have family in franchising. And for both of us, we were very fortunate to have some family in franchising to at least get us spinning the cycles a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, Steve has been a great role model. And really, when you think about a business like SMB, I'm coming in and we're doing more, we're refining, we're constantly evolving and changing our business to meet the needs of not only our customers, but also the macro environment, right? Just the world. What is the regulatory environment changing to do or need? What is the marketing and the sentiment changing to do or need? SMB was founded in 2009, and over the last more than 15 years have helped over 500 brands to grow and really be thoughtful about their engagement in the franchise industry. And so it's hardly that I came on board and wanted to shake everything up. It was fundamentally kind of saying and knowing and talking about these different models where now I was building tech companies and helping them raise money and build and scale. And there's much more resilient brands with founders that are operating, that want to grow and change their business. Franchising was a little more fun. You had real people doing real jobs in the communities where they lived. And I think that's something I constantly come back to, because we're in a world now where Everybody's a community. Everybody wants to be a part of a CEO group. Everybody wants to be, in some sort of networking or affinity group for whatever resonates with you. And that's all great. But at the end of the day, I used to tell founders that were working in, the meta space with the goggles and stuff. I said, no matter what you put in those goggles, if we all wear those for 40 hours a week to go do our job and do whatever in 5-10 years, you're still going to need a real house. You're going to need a real roof. You're going to need real plumbing. You're going to need a real toilet. You're going to need real electrical run. You're going to need a really good office chair because you're sitting all day. There's things that you need fundamentally hyper locally that can be delivered to you in a very, very scalable way through the franchise model. And so all of those things kind of resonated at the same point where I said, was very lucky to have some activity around, exits and other events in my life with companies, and said, I can take this over here and really dive in on franchising because I want to understand the model. I want to help founders really grow their businesses. And that's a core to what we've been doing for a long, long time.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think I really like the point on the goggles. Like, you can try to live like in the third, fourth, 10th dimension, whatever it may be, but once you take the goggles off, reality is going to hit you in the face at some point. So trying to actually adapt to times while also incorporating some of the newer dynamics as well, I think is really important. So one thing I'd be curious with, we kind of established SMB Franchise Advisors, and I always say, like, in the world of franchising, if you're not in franchising, it's just like people have so many assumptions about the world of franchising. It really is like its own niche industry. If you're not in franchising, people just have a lot of assumptions about franchising. And I'm sure you deal with a lot of business owners starting to maybe think about franchising. I'd be curious on kind of like those initial outreach calls that you have. What are like some things that people think about franchising that just aren't necessarily the realities of franchising? That's like, you're hearing it like over and over again. Like, maybe we want to kind of spread the mission. Like, no, that's not franchising.
Yeah. It's funny because I think the big one that I hear that I just say is not the case, right? Everybody thinks it's always food. And I said, no, there's certainly standards that you can set with certain products, and a food product has a minimum, like a health standard, right? So then if your special sauce is X or your thing is Y, go do that. Like, that could be a great franchise for somebody. But a lot of what we're seeing, from a success perspective and a real market-driven perspective is all those things I alluded to, kind of joking, right? But real services that you need in a real community. It can be power washing the house and the windows. It can be doing your taxes, right? It can be anything around roofing or paving or, leaving event spaces in a certain way for weddings, right? The people who bring the big letters in. A lot of those are franchises that, look, they might be supplemental income, they might be lifestyle kind of franchises. They're probably not generational wealth, daycare centers, dog hotels, big build out kind of fit costs for franchisees. But there's a lot of ways to take those businesses and scale them and grow them. And so I think the first education is for folks, out of what you do today, what do you want to franchise? What do you want to let somebody do with you based on what you've learned, right? And if you understand what those things are, then you're in a great place to start having a conversation about franchising your business.
No, I think that's really important. Yeah, it's just there's so many different things to think about when you're starting to think about franchising. It can just be so overwhelming. And I always go back to the point of, like, you want to have someone that has an industry specific experience in whatever it is you want to be. You want to be an NBA player, go find the best basketball player in your town and learn from him. And going back to, like, you don't need to take everything that they did, but learn what you like, figure out what you don't like, and then start to go from there. I think it's just such a powerful lesson. And as you're on the phone with a lot of businesses starting to think about franchising, it can be very exciting. You think about your local business across the country, maybe even internationally. Like, that's a really, really cool idea for someone, especially someone that, you put your whole life into one business idea. You see it helping out your local community, but to spread throughout the country is like super impressive. With the businesses that you speak to, are all businesses meant to scale to that next level, whether it's private equity or franchising, or are there some businesses where it's like, I think just that one corporate location is like kind of like the maxed out point. is there businesses where you can tell they'll have success in franchising, whereas somewhere it's like you've kind of reached your growth limit, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, there is, and I tell people all the time, I'm not trying to be cute, but in franchising, you can kind of do whatever you want. Like if you're starting from scratch, you get to set those standards and those systems and the things that you actually want to offer to other people, right? And so I had a conversation with the guy who owns the gym that I go to, and he's got 4 gyms, and he owns them all. He runs them. Got great coaches and all these different things in there. And I said, hey, what do you think about, why don't you potentially franchise your business? And he said, I've been thinking about that. And we got to talking. Yeah. And he was telling me that he can open 1 gym in about 3 to 4 months. He's focused on New Jersey, where I live right now. And he said, so what do you think I should do? Because I can already do a bunch of openings a year, kind of 3 to 4 new spaces a year at a 3-month clip. And he's got the right trainers to go support those people to go train. And I said, honestly, I don't think you should franchise your business. I said, you sound like you're pretty good with where you're at. Now, if you want to go to Denver, Colorado, you probably need someone who understands Denver, Colorado. If you want to go to Pennsylvania, you might need somebody who understands Pennsylvania, right? In the way that you understand this part of New Jersey outside of New York City, which happens to be very densely populated, right? So he can have multiple gyms in this area and still feel very good about it. We said, let's chat again in 6 months. It's not the right time because you're doing great stuff with your business corporately. So you do see that all the time, and you do know that. And you have to be willing to say to somebody, right? If not today, maybe tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, you've still got a great business, right? So there's lots and lots of ways to be refining that sort of diligence process as to how you should grow.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a really good point. And one thing I kind of want to break down when you're thinking about you have the business, whether you want to start to franchise, is it, let's say, kind of diving off your example, you're a business in Miami, Florida, where I am. Maybe you have 3 locations in Miami. You want to start to grow slowly throughout maybe West Palm, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando. So kind of all in-state growth that probably someone can handle. Is it kind of if it's in-state growth, you don't necessarily need to franchise the model, or how do you go about figuring out what stage of growth is where you should start to consider franchising?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I'll pick on, New Jersey's very small and very densely populated. Florida is very big and has become more densely populated, right? So we have a client right now who's based in South Florida and said, for me to get to Orlando would be too much. I want to franchise because I know that it's a great market for me, and I know someone will run it really well. It's also close enough for me to service them, right? I can go and cut the ribbon with them as the franchisor with my first franchisee. I can train them on, the ground, as well as with operations manuals, with training tools and other mobile apps and things that are available now, right? So it is a blend, but that's an example where someone said, hey, I want to grow in state, but I know I don't want to do it. I want to change my mindset to really focus on supporting and growing that person who will do it.
No, I think that's really, really good point, and kind of diving more into that. So you have a business that you kind of alluded to where they could kind of grow in New Jersey with kind of just the founder kind of being the face of the business, helping with that growth. Whereas franchising, you're kind of building the SOPs, the operations, and kind of in franchising, when you're building these new locations, you don't necessarily want the founder, the CEO, helping out with all these new locations, because if it's just the founder, that's very much just the business model where it's that guy, that girl leading the face of the business. Whereas in franchising, that founder has invested into the infrastructure, the support, the resources, so that they are not needed in these new locations. They'll have, business coaches, people that know the business and the industry and franchising to help ramp up the business, because it's really a growth strategy to grow at a pretty, whatever rate you really want to, based on using people as that growth method. So I think that's just pretty interesting, in my opinion, as you're starting to think about franchising from the independent business model to kind of the franchise business model. But kind of diving a little bit more into that as you're kind of on those initial calls with those business owners, they're starting to play out this path of maybe franchising, maybe just continue opening up more corporate locations. What kind of market research is going into, you have a business, let's say, let's just do a painting business, for example. You talk to a painting business, and how do you figure out kind of like the market research and like the viability of it will work in other locations? What does that kind of process look like for SMB?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the first things that we'll do with a client when they are a client is a deep competitive study, right? So out of the franchise landscape, what is a B2B buyer? Because again, these founders of their businesses, right? They're saying, this is what I do and I sell to customers, right? Should I franchise my business means I'm going to sell the business. I'm a B2B seller now, not a B2C seller. So framing that mindset, making sure folks understand it is the first piece. And then, really kind of a competitive analysis and talking about, hey, here's what the landscape is in painting as a segment of X. Is it exterior, interior? What things do you do as well? What things do you, again, potentially not want to let a franchisee do that you do corporately because it works in your market? By the same token, what's the range of services that might also be available to a franchisee if it works for them? And so really understanding, with that client, what makes your area work. For example, we see businesses up in New England all the time, and they might say that they're seasonal because in the winter they get a lot of snow. If you have somebody in Florida, it's probably not going to be seasonal, right? And they're going to operate maybe year round. And so how do you functionally, create those opportunities? Because A, it has to make sense for the franchisee that they can make money, that you can support them in what they're doing, but also match that local market, right? So a lot of that sits with the franchisee to do, but as a new franchisor, we're going to help you understand what those levers are because they're important to your core business as well.
No, that's really interesting, Brian. And as I'm kind of like hearing you speak more about the franchise model and like kind of the independent business model, one of the things I'm kind of curious about is kind of like the chicken and the egg story, where it's like, do you have a business, you have success, and then you start to franchise, or do you start the business with the idea of this is going to be a franchise model and you want to start early on building the infrastructure? Do you have can you have success both ways, or do you have any recommendations there? Obviously, franchising can seem overwhelming when you don't even have any success as a business owner. So how do you start going about these different stages?
Yeah, no, it's true. And we do tell people, having that product market fit, having that validation, right, in your local market is super important, because the other thing it allows you to do is be a better franchisor, right? You truly understand, let's call it 12 months, 1 year's worth of cycles in the business. So then when you talk about, oh, we want to put a financial performance representation, we want to use item 19 to talk about what we did corporately as we grew, also the learnings we had, right? Some expenses, some other things that didn't work out, but we want to tell that story very honestly to a potential candidate. If you look at that and you use that as a tool, you can say, here's a year's worth of stuff that we did. So that should be kind of in your mind as something that we'll want to be able to do together. But the other thing is that, again, it depends on your business and it depends on what you want to get out of it. A lot of folks say you need to have 5 units open already. Well, we would say no, but if you fundamentally understand the units that you've got and you know the things that you want to do, there is a way to build that system today so that tomorrow is easier, and it should be easier for your franchisees, right? And that's the whole point of refining that process constantly and changing through the cycle of about 12 months that we take to work together.
No, that's really interesting. Kind of like that. It's nice to have an actual timeline for those business owners to at least start to think about those early stages. Obviously, it can be very overwhelming in franchising, and really the key with any good franchise, whatever their association is in franchising, franchisee, franchisor, broker, whatever it is, are they selling you something, or are they just telling you the information? I think is just a really good point, because in franchising, it's just such a tight-knit community with people. So if you ever feel like you're being sold on something, that's a major red flag in my opinion, no matter who it is. So I think, we're really just here to kind of educate people about the world of franchising, which I think is very, very powerful. And I know, Brian, that hour's kind of wrapping up. I know we had a commercial break as well, but I know we want to start to wrap this down now. One or two kind of final questions for you, Brian. one of the things I hear a lot with like a business turning to a franchise model is that it's a privilege. It's a privilege to turn a business into a franchise model. How do you think a business earns that privilege to start to franchise?
Yeah. Yeah, look, that's a great sort of way to think about it. I think it's a privilege to grow, right? I think that no matter what path you choose, it's a privilege as a business to grow to another corporate location, to certainly a franchise system, because you have different liabilities. You have partners now that you have to care about and that have to do well, and be supported in a very specific way by you. But I think that, the privilege of growth is earned by doing things in the right way. And I know that's such an easy thing to say, right? But if you build a good business, you treat your customers well, you treat your employees well, they validate that they would want to work for you, right? The question I ask all the time is, do you have a key person, a manager in the restaurant, an operations person, an administrator who does all your back end support, who should be elevated in their career and in working with you, and they love you and get along and they know the brand and all these different things, right? Well, franchising allows that person to have a better opportunity to work and to grow their skills and to do more things, right? So all these kinds of things that happen internally in the company as well as outside, if you franchise, are all earned by doing the right product, the right thing in the right way for the local community and the buyers that you have.
Hmm. No, yeah, I think it really comes down to, the long-term vision. Why are you franchising that business? So as a candidate, there's so many options out there today. So, they're going to come in doing their due diligence. So making sure that you align with the founder and making sure that founder is not the sole reason of the success of the business. So I think those are all really, really great points. And I've learned a lot on today's episode. And I think I have another like 5 pages worth of questions just based upon the content that we've covered today. But one final question for you, Brian, just with the name of the podcast really being Conquer the Mind, really trying to dive into the mindsets of people that have accomplished a lot of success. And you've accomplished success in corporate America and Wall Street, and you've accomplished success in the world of franchising. And you're still working on that as well, helping more people on a daily basis. But I'd be curious, kind of the difference in the mindset between wanting to have success in Wall Street and corporate America versus having success in entrepreneurship and as a business owner. What are kind of like the different like mindsets between those two and having success?
Yeah. No, you're very complimentary. Too much so. Lots of growing and learning and changing all the time. The only thing I ever guarantee is errors, and that we'll fix it. Right? We'll find things as we grow and change, and we'll do things wrong, and then we'll fix it. As long as we fix it and we're growing, personally and in business, you can't ask for more than that. But what I would say is, really the corporate sort of path is a very different path, but it's one that I think people pretty clearly understand, even though post-COVID, the New York Times had a whole article about the fragmentation of workforce and this sort of great resignation that had started during COVID, people leaving their jobs and then never stopping actually leaving their jobs. There's been quite a lot of turnover since 2020, 21, 22, all the way through this year and last year. So those kinds of things I think people take stock of, and the things that you earn the privilege to do, right? Whether it's grow in your career or grow a business independently, are both not dissimilar things. If you're growing in your career, you should have your head down. You should be working on the things with the people who actually know what they're doing, especially as a younger person, and take advantage of that, right? I mean, I was very lucky that in the corporate world, you have a very well-defined sort of training program and scope. And so the scope that I was able to take advantage of got me some cycles with different leaders in the bank, different leaders in other organizations I was in, and really exposure to their thought process and what they do every day. As an independent, business now, you look at the world and say, who do I want to empower to change and grow with me and be a part of a journey that we're on, right? And fundamentally saying, yes, this is what I want to do. This is the way that I want to grow and that I want to deal with people. Once you know what those two things are, you can build your own sandbox, and those rules will come together based on your values.
No, that's awesome, Brian. I think that's a really great way to kind of wrap up the podcast. craft your own sandbox. I think that's such a great message. I remember having a sandbox growing up, and it can look however you want. I remember years after you stop using it, it's just a bunch of weeds. So it's like, you got to continue to build and nurture that if you want to have ultimate success with something. So just for everyone, I always like to kind of summarize the podcast at the end with kind of just some of my takeaways. And I really like the point on, if you're a business owner thinking about franchising, thinking about, franchising is a people business. You very much, you're likable, communication skills, you like dealing with people. So it's a natural fit to be in the world of franchising, where you're empowering other people to build their dreams. And I think very similar to if you're a candidate thinking about investing into a franchise, thinking about what that customer or client looks like. Because if you're a B2B and now you're dealing with B2C, that's a transition. Or do you want to deal with children, senior care? So figuring out the type of person you like to deal with is really going to lead to a lot of your success. So if you're a business owner, you're thinking about franchising, understand that franchising is a people business. You're going to be dealing with a lot of people. So do you like working with people, empowering other people? I think it is really, really key. And one of the good things I think you said is that it doesn't have to be so hard. I think with my generation especially, we don't want to figure everything out by ourselves, rather than kind of listen to some of the older generations and take their advice. So if you want to be great at something, for what I've done personally is I find someone that's great at that, and I surround myself with that person, try to pick apart their brain. What do I like about what they do? What do I not like about what they do? And how can I do things a little bit differently to put my own print on that? And just the idea of franchising, you can go into all these different industries, feel like you're making a difference, but franchising, it's real people, it's real jobs, it's a real local community that you're making a difference for. There's no like, I'm filling out a spreadsheet, maybe this is going to have some impact on society. This is a direct impact on the people in your community and the tax dollars of everyone in that local community. So I think those are all really great points. And just going back to when you were first getting started, Brian, like, you took advantage of internships, the jobs that were in front of you, starting to figure out from an early age what you like and what you don't like. And I think it's a really good compliment to you. At such a young age, you've still had massive success. And I would attribute that from an outside perspective just to you doing those internships, learning all these different things at a young age, so that you know what you don't like, and now you know what you like. So now it's easy to figure out what that passion, that mission, that why statement is. And really just my last point is, I liked how humble you are. And this is what I noticed about some of the most successful people too. They're very humble. You said you're not the best at everything, but you like figuring out problems or passions, whether it's your problem or someone else's problem. And I think a lot of franchising really comes down to like your likability index, your coachability index. What are you willing to learn, communicate, dealing with other people? Because this is a people business. This is what we're here for, to help and empower other people. So those are my main takeaways. I have a lot of notes from today. Brian, I appreciate your time on the Conquer the Mind podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Great to be here, Josh. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Anyone, if you found any value, like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, check out the website in the bio. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks.